Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Line Change, the NHL betting podcast from the Action Network, presented to you by BetMGM. My name is Michael Leboff. Joining me, as always, is my friend, co-host, colleague, Nick Martin. Nick, this will likely be our last episode for a few months, and it should be a lot of fun. Obviously, no games to talk about. The Vegas Golden Knights are your Stanley Cup champions, but we're here to talk about betting on the NHL draft, and we'll take a quick gander at the off season to come. If there's any teams you might want to bet now, and then we'll get out of here and enjoy what is going to be like a 1 week off season for the NHL. It seems like it'll be the draft, free agency on Saturday, maybe a couple of days after that, and then everyone runs up to their cottages in Canada until September. But before that, the draft is a very fun and it's a fun thing to bet on. It's not just fun because it's the NHL draft, there's buzz, and if you're a hockey fan, you're gonna like it, but it's fun because you can beat the market a lot easier compared to, I mean, it's still hard, but a lot easier compared to the NFL draft, the NBA draft. Bookmakers just are not paying attention to the NHL draft like they do for those entities. So we've had some success, both you and I, in years past. You will talk about Philip Broberg. I'll always have a soft spot for Simon Nemeth on the Devils. But yeah, how you doing?
Good. Yeah, I'm really excited to get into this. I think that relative to other years, we didn't get as many concrete, like kind of almost leaks that I would hope. But I also think this is one of the most interesting drafts to cover, regardless, just on so many levels. I think there's a lot of good betting concepts to get into too around the draft with things like there's a lot of bets with no, like some of the worst bets I saw, I think were things like uh to go top 10. I saw markets on that. I'd say probably just steer clear of those. The prices were all pretty awful. Um Trying to think what else. Yeah, they kind of like covered some of the volatile angles a little better than in previous years. I think, getting into some of the players will be a lot of fun. So yeah, I'm excited to get going.
And it comes down to you want to have a strategy. You want to kind of just like predict out how it's going to go. And I'll use the Nemeth example from last year to kind of explain when all the hype started coming on Slafkovsky to be the number one overall pick over Shane Wright. And Slafkovsky ended up going from like 7-1 to -300 to be the first overall pick by the time it was made. After Shane Wright had spent the entire year as basically a consensus favorite. Um, what ended up happening was everyone was paying attention to that market, right? Everyone was like, "Oh man, should I bet Slafkovsky? Should I now bet Wright? Should I buy low on Wright now?" Um, but what I did was I said, okay, if it is Slafkovsky and everyone's focusing on the number one overall pick, let's take a step down and go off a bet that is going to be correlated to that, which is the Devils were at 2. And that meant that New Jersey would have the opportunity to draft Shane Wright. One problem, New Jersey has 2 young phenoms at center, Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier. So he would have been blocked. So outside of a trade down, the Devils, it seemed pretty obvious the Devils would either take Slafkovsky if he fell to 2, or a defenseman. It was David Jiricek or Simon Nemeth. Nemeth was like 18-1, and Jiricek was maybe 8-1. So I just said I'll just take the guy at the longer odds. And the whole point of the story isn't to pat myself on the back. It feels good. It's still a year later, but it's to explain that what you're going to want to do is try to map out what's going to happen. Obviously, we know Bedard's going to go first, and I think everybody is going to focus on the number 3 overall pick because it feels like it's pretty bang on. Like Bedard, there's no use in even putting him up with odds. He's going 1, and then Adam Fantilli, center out of University of Michigan, is -550 to go number 2 overall. And then after that, it starts to get a little interesting. The general makeup of this draft is that there are 5. There's a big 5, but there's one wild card in that big 5. So if there's
Yeah,
5, yeah, go on.
sorry, I think the one thing that's a little different, and which is what makes this draft so amazing, is that Wright's stock really plummeted pre-draft where like you're debating how good he really was. I don't think any of the big five have had that. Like it's really like you're debating a
Which
lot
one?
of guys that have a
Yeah.
ton of positive
Right.
arguments going in their favor. I think it's going to be really hard to pass on Leo Carlson, like with what we know about NHL GMs. Although Kekalainen has been a bit of a wild card this summer, he had such a good world championship. He's a safe bet. He's a good two-way player. He seems like a really good young kid. So everything like, and we'll probably be going into intangibles a little bit. I think for Montreal at 5, it's really interesting because it sounds like they might go a little off the board. But I wonder if it just seems like such a slam dunk to pass on Carlson. I think that hinges a ton of bets, which I think that's one of the most important like
Right.
things. If you're looking at some of the longer odds bets, like what do you think of where Leo Carlson is going to go? What do you think about how Columbus views him?
Yeah. So the wild card in the big five, I should say, is Bedard, Anna Fantilli, Leo Carlson, and he's a center from Sweden. Another center, Will Smith, he is from Massachusetts, and then Matvei Michkov. Michkov is the wild card of the bunch. He's signed for another 3 years to on his KHL deal in SKA St. Petersburg. He's a Russian teenager, so there's always some kind of little, dip your toe in the water and then pull it back out with those kind of players because we've just seen it in the past with whether it was Evgeny Malkin, going back to Slava Fetisov. Like it could be really hard to get these players to come over. And things, of course, in Russia are not above board at the moment either. So there's some geopolitical intrigue to the NHL draft, which is always fun. He's the wild card because there are a lot of people out there that say he's the second best player in this draft. And he's it's like Bedard, Mitch Cobb in his own tier at 2, and then the other 3 players in the big 5, Fantilli, Carlson, and Smith are then kind of a 3-horse race. We'll see who's the best of them. So Michkov could go anywhere from 2 to 8. It seems to be your Capitals are at 8, and I don't think that they'd pass on him if he fell that far. But it comes down to what teams are patient enough on a top 2 talent to wait those 3 years and perhaps never get him. Who's willing to take that risk? Which GMs feel comfortable enough in their jobs that they can draft this guy and they're going to be around, and it's not going to be a situation where Jarmo Kekalainen drafts him, he gets canned, and then some other GM gets to reap that reward. So all of this kind of comes into play to try to figure out who's going to be drafted where. And as we said, like it does feel like Bedard, Fantilli is the 1-2 consensus, although it could be Bedard, Michkov, and then that throws everything off. And I'm going to try to set myself up for one of these top, either the Ducks or the Blue Jackets going off the board, which isn't out of the question. And right now, Leo Carlson is minus 300 to go 3rd overall. I think that if the situation here is, I don't think Columbus would go Michkov, but if Anaheim goes Michkov or Columbus goes Will Smith, which we've heard a little bit about, there's a couple mock drafts that have Smith going 3rd, then we get into a situation where the Sharks, who I think are a possibility for Michkov, could put you in a position where Leo Carlson drops a little bit further and he ends up being 5th. And that's my favorite bet of the board at the moment. It's 40-1 out there for Leo Carlson to go 5th overall. And it's just in all likelihood, Carlson goes 3rd. But I want to be set up for that chaos moment that nobody sees coming, because usually by the time this stuff kind of gets to you or me, it's the numbers obliterated. But the fact that things are been kept so tight to the vest for these the 3rd, 4th, and 5th pick, and even the 2nd pick, the numbers are still out there. So that's what I want to try to take advantage of. Whether it pays off or not, we'll see.
Yeah, I like it. And that brings up like I think one of the most important points with like draft betting, where it's like a little hard to do a pod, but it really can be as simple as just like really paying attention to what's out there, what beat reporters say. The Broberg example I always use because it was basically confirmed while odds were still up that the Oilers were never going to pass on him, and everyone knew they wanted a D. I hate trying to. That's the one thing that scares me too. Is like at what point did some of these teams realize you just pick the best player in the draft. Like that's the smartest thing to do this high up the board is you should pick the best player because the best player is always going to be the most useful for you. And that Broberg example is perfect too, because they could have taken Zegras. Now Zegras is exactly what the Oilers want. And they're sitting here with Broberg, who's a third pairing defenseman. So I always wonder like at what point are some of these teams going to be a little more wise with some of their strategy, and that's scary betting wise. I think I like my favorite Michkov play, I think is he's out there at plus 380 to go fifth. I think that's a playable number. I think that's long enough where it's like that's a fun risk if he gets to the Habs. I don't know if I see them passing. It's one of those things like I want the NHL teams to think along with me on it, but he's so good and none of these teams are winning anything for those 3 years anyways. Like half these players, I shouldn't say half because this draft's so strong, but you might get very little out of some of these guys for the first 2 years. So it's just so hard for me to see how you level yourself into passing on Michkov. I know I need the teams to think along with me on that, but I think you're getting a good enough number there.
And I think the one exception to that logic is Columbus. I think Columbus actually thinks we're going to be good. We're maybe not good, but we're going to contend for a playoff spot next year.
For sure.
And that's why I think you can draw a line through them with Michkov.
Yeah, I agree. I think it does seem like they've kind of like tipped their hand that
they're drafting a center.
I mean, they signed guys to play next year and act like they're contending. So, and that's where I do think maybe they look at Carlson as like someone who's going to come in and could actually be a decent number 2 center next season, a pretty safe bet. And obviously still high enough upside. So I think that's pretty interesting there. And then the one I'm really interested to see where Reinbacher goes. I wouldn't bet on him. So his total set at 6.5. And I just think that's interesting to see if like one of these Arizona or Montreal actually grabs him there. I like him. I'm not trying to pick on the guy. Like I think he's the best defenseman in the draft. That said, to me, it seems like he's getting his status elevated because he's a big right shot defenseman, which is obviously a commodity, but it's not a commodity like a true top scorer. And to me, it just seems like, him being the best big defenseman, right shot, classic NHL intangibles, where I don't think you're getting the same kind of upside you are with like the other guys in that area. Like I wouldn't have him up there. I know some people do think that under 6.5, or I should say over 6.5, I think it's plus 115 is a good bet on him. And I don't necessarily disagree. The thing that scares me is that you're trusting Montreal and Arizona to see it that way, which is kind of always the tough thing with these bets is like, I think that it's the right thing to let him go considering the kind of offensive talents you're getting, but who knows the way they're looking at it. So probably, I think that at plus 115 though, you probably are getting a number where you could take that risk.
The pro. So we've talked a little bit about Columbus, and you kind of mentioned with Arizona, Montreal, like just trusting these teams. I also want to talk about San Jose a little bit. They'll be picking 4. If it's chalk, it's Bedard, Fantilli, Carlson, and then the overwhelming favorite would be Will Smith at 4. It likely would be a choice between Smith, Michkov, and then the outside chances. I've heard them connected to Zach Benson a little bit, but Reinbacher, Ryan Leonard maybe. And the Sharks, I think, have also had a tendency, and they've been drafting later in first rounds typically, that they and this is a new regime, that they've kind of been a team that generally won't mind going off the board. Whether they can do that in this situation is a little different, but that's just something to keep in mind when it comes to like I said, mapping out like the chaos. So I wouldn't be surprised if the team that does draft Ryan, like if it comes down to if it does go Bedard, Fantilli, Carlson, if we see San Jose, then do exactly kind of what you just said, which is like let's get the defenseman. Like even though they need centers, they need everything. That's another thing to keep in mind. I just want to circle back to Michkov too. You can get he's minus 200 to go over 5.5. So he's going to be a good plus number to go under. I just think that he's going to go. If I'm guessing, he's going to go in that top 5. I just
Yeah.
can't see. I get that. I get the issues and stuff, but there are enough teams. And like you can draw a line through Columbus, you can draw a line through Chicago. So now you're wondering, is he going 2, 3, or excuse me, 2, 4, or 5 to cash that bet? And I think of those 3 teams, San Jose can afford to wait. Montreal can sell it. And even Anaheim. Like if Anaheim took him second overall, I don't think anyone would be like, it's a terrible pick. I think everyone would say
No.
that's smart. Like
Yeah.
and that's what GMs are trying to do. Like they're trying just not to get absolutely panned. And yeah, if this is reading too much into it, you can tell me. But there was I think it was Jeff Marek was saying the Pat Verbeek, he was his mentor was Steve Yzerman. Steve Yzerman famously drafted Moritz Seider, 13 or 14 picks above where he was projected to go a couple years ago. Ended up being a great pick. So don't be surprised if Verbeek is fine with that and ends up blowing things up by taking Michkov second. And if he does, then we're in some serious business with that Carlson 40-1 as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that yeah, there's so many things that are just hard to predict. If you're someone who wants like the simplest line, I did look at what Fantilli, Carlson, Will Smith was. It's out there at plus 105. So that, if you're someone who thinks that's the way it's going to go, that's an option. I don't know if that's like the funnest. I feel like something's going to go down. Something's going to get shaken up.
Yeah, it always does. And you know what? If it doesn't and you get beat, that's fine. Like you don't. It's a lot easier to kind of just like you can just go right ahead and set it and forget it and just bet into the chalk in the NHL draft. But once one thing goes awry, I would say it's always going to be 50-50 that in the top 5, no matter what the draft class is, someone's going off the board. And if something goes awry, then there's an opportunity to get paid off big. Whereas if it just stays on track, like your payoff isn't going to be, congratulations, you just won a bet where, the Dallas Stars beat the Colorado Avalanche at home, like they were plus 115. Like it's not.
Yeah.
So that's how I approach the draft is that, I just want to bet someone to go off the board. And once you're in that camp, you want to be set up for it. Because if someone does go off the board, all your chalk bets are blown up.
Yeah, this doesn't really feel like the year to lay like big money trying to get payoffs with chalk. To me, it just feels like so many teams are playing it close to the vest. And I don't know. Yeah, it feels like more likely something to get shaken up. I did read The Athletic had a big article breaking down a bunch of different scouts and executives' takes on where Michkov would go. I thought it was really interesting. You could see like the contrasting viewpoints. Obviously, you don't get to know who the scouts were, if they're relevant at all, what teams' chances are they're nowhere near the top of the board. But I do think it showed like all the contrasting viewpoints, which I think kind of speaks to your point that Michkov's probably not going to stick around long because it just takes one team to see it as like, because there was a couple guys in there saying like they clear cut thought he was the second best player in the draft. I think that's what he is. It's so hard to score in the NHL. And I think the thing that makes Michkov like so appealing, in my opinion, where like it's almost he's getting so much bad talk about like all the intangibles, but he's so smart. Like what he does well is just see the ice incredibly well and understand just literally where all the other 9 skaters are and what he has. And I think that has been most consistently what converts at the NHL. Like what you don't want and what I think becomes riskier is players of the style that were just boys against men in junior. Like I'm not going to pick on Byfield because he actually looks like he's still going to be pretty good, but I think he was a good example of someone where it's just like when he played junior hockey, he was just such a beast. Like he was just taking it to guys who didn't know how to play with him. And once he got to the NHL, there was a big adjustment period with the way that he could play. And I think Michkov, you want like guys like that, like Kucherov, where it's just like they're not doing anything that is them forcing like beating guys one-on-one and that sort of thing. It's just a lot of awareness and knowing what they have. And I think that's the hardest to take away, regardless of whether players are obviously getting stronger and they're game planning more so and that sort of thing. So I think Michkov is really, really appealing. If he were to somehow drop to the Caps, we'd have to have some sort of a celebration on this show, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think Philly is to me like his absolute nut bottom where like I think they'd step up and grab him. I don't really see how Arizona can't take him either, but anyways, that's enough on that.
But he's the key. That's why we keep spending time on him, because I'm trying to think of an example in other sports, and I just can't do it because the NBA and the NFL don't deal with Russia. Like it's just completely different. Uh, I guess the thing you could say is like, would it like planning for a team to trade into the top five or something is like the closest I can think of. But um, it's very rare in a draft, especially one like this, where you have a consensus top five, and you also have pretty much a consensus top three in terms of talents with Michkov, Bedard, and Fantilli, that one of those talents could also just be passed on by basically everybody because
Well,
of
and
what's
even Will Smith though, and that's what makes it like so interesting is like half of the draft years, I'll just, like watch the picks as they come up on my phone or whatever. And this one, I definitely want to sit there and see
yeah.
exactly how it goes. And it'll be like can't miss TV because it's going to be really hard to predict the top 7 or 8. Like, I think there's just so many variables. So, yeah, I agree. It feels like something's going to come off the rails, I think I mean, it almost has to. There's no way. It's not like anyone even knows who's favored to go at
Right.
4, 5, and 6. So,
So, all right, let's wrap it up as best we can. Like I said, my favorite bet is still Leo Carlsson to go fifth, 40 to 1. I also don't hate looking for a big number on like those exact order props, like you said, where it would be Bedard, Fantilli, Carlson, Reinbacher, because I think kind of what you said about Reinbacher is interesting and kind of piqued my interest in this, is that he's got the intangibles, and there could just be a team, and maybe it's San Jose, that's just like, we want to take the best defenseman. And if it's coming down to him versus Will Smith, I think you can see teams being like, we'll take the defenseman over Smith, who, yeah, he's a big bodied center. He's going to college next year, and by all accounts is basically a top 3 pick in most normal years in the NHL draft. But uh, there is something that just drives these NHL general managers nuts about long right shot defensemen. So and he is, like you said, he's also clearly the number 1 defenseman on the board. So if there's a team, whether and Columbus has already said they're taking a center, so come down to San Jose or Montreal. But if San Jose just was like, screw it, let's get the defenseman, I think there is a world where that lives, and you'll get a decent number on that. So that is also interesting to me, is going Bedard, Fantilli, Carlson, Reinbacher as the exact order in that market. What about you?
yeah, if I had to summarize, I think looking for Michkov fifth at plus 380 is one of my favorite plays. I'd say take the advice of being wary of some of the no option bets. I know those probably aren't very popular, but like the top 10 thing, wouldn't do that. And then the last tip I'd say is just kind of keep your eyes out for what you can find on Twitter and see how that correlates, because sometimes really useful info does leak, or like if you see confirmation about one guy going somewhere and you think that indicates something, because it has been abnormally like close to the vest. Usually by now you can find some team or someone who's pretty much just declared who they're going to go with, and we haven't really gotten that yet. So
Yeah,
keep your eyes out.
the only thing that's been tipped outside of Bedard is that Jarmo Kekalainen said he's going to take a center.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is, like, I think it's at the point with what they've done where they're trying to win now, their need for a center. Carlson's showing at the World Championships. I do think probably him, but we'll see. It's
Or
wild.
it could be Fantilli.
That's true. Yeah,
because it does sound like the reports from Nashville now are that there are some people talking to,
it sounds like it's been a good week for
Yeah,
Michkov. Like it sounds like his stock has risen
rising
a little bit. Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
people
and
are.
again, I think if he gets to 5, the Habs take him, and I think he can get to 5 often enough that there's value with plus 380. And that's the thing. Like maybe they've calmed the concerns a little bit that he is going to come after his contract in Russia. Because to me, the debate is more: do you think there's a world where he just doesn't come play at all? Like I don't think you can actually be that worried that he's not there for 3 years. All these teams are going to be pretty horrible for 3 years. Like that's the reality of it. they're going to be mid at best. Columbus, I know they think they're turning around, but I don't think they are. Like they can get 90 points maybe.
All right, so that's the NHL draft. Let's quickly look at the Stanley Cup odds for next season, and whether it's just a cup future or kind of what these odds are telling us. Um, let's just comment on them for a couple minutes and then get going. For the first time in a couple of seasons, we don't have a clear team as a Stanley Cup favorite. Past 2 years, it's been Colorado, who've been in their own little section of the board. But now it's Colorado's still a favorite, but very slightly. These are from BetMGM, the sponsor of Line Change. Colorado's 8-1. Oilers leaves at plus 950. Bruins right behind them, 10-1. Hurricanes, Devils, Golden Knights 12-1. Rangers 14-1. Stars 16. Lightning 16. Panthers 18. Kings 22. Flames 25. Wild 30. Penguins 35. Sabres and Senators 40, along with the Blues, Wings, Islanders, Kraken, Canucks, Jets 50, Predators 66. So are your Caps, CBJ 100-1, and then the Blackhawks, Ducks, Flyers, Coyotes, Canadians, and Sharks are all up there in the triple digits as well. One team I am circling is, and the same thing as last season too, is St. Louis. They seem to be pretty aggressive in the trade market. I don't think either one of us think that they're like that far away. And also the Central Division is going to, I think, be pretty terrible.
Yeah, their
It's going to
D
be,
course. I don't
yeah,
know. I
it
don't think you
depends.
can
Like
make it work.
they're trying to maneuver the decor. It seems like they're trying to move Krug out. They're maybe Falk, whoever. Um, they're a team that I could just see having a very busy offseason. And in that division, is there much of a difference between them and Minnesota overall? I don't think so. Like Winnipeg's going to be bad. Nashville's going to be bad. Arizona, I actually think Arizona's sneaky to like finish fifth of the division, but they're going to be bad. Chicago. So you're looking at Winnipeg potentially, Nashville, Chicago, Arizona. That's half the division already. That's rebuilding, and then Minnesota's like a lukewarm third favorite. So it's more about their environment than their actual team for St. Louis. So that's just one team I want to circle.
Yeah, I'm scared of them. I think that it's gonna be tough. I still, if the Kraken, if you can get them 50-1, they're one of the teams that I'm like, how are they this low where some of the other ones at? Like they're gonna be pretty good. They're not losing anyone. They had the Calder Trophy. They had Cartier in the AHL win the Rookie of the Year and have a good showing. So I just think they have a lot going right. Burakovsky's gonna be back. They're not losing many key pieces. The goaltending's not great. But the other thing is they've been very on like they have not been very aggressive this summer or this trade deadline. They were not aggressive at all when they had the tools that they could have been. And I wonder if next year when they're like inevitably in the playoff hunt that they could be. So that's where like I just think they're a good team to get in on now because they're one of the ones where I'm like this team's going to compete. 50-1 is too long. So that's kind of my favorite long shot where like I think you're gonna get them to the playoffs. I think the Oilers, depending on what number you get, are one of the teams I'd buy now. It's hard for me to see how they're not really good because they basically just need two guys to be really good. And pretty
Yep.
much the only word you get screwed is if McDavid or Draisaitl gets injured. And then the one team we kind of talked about it before, but I think Colorado's a pure fade as a favorite. And I feel more so, I know maybe Johansson bounces back, but seeing
That's what they went with. Yeah.
that's what they would like, that's their move. That's what they've got in this like up their sleeve. Talking about them as the outright favorite. And like, I've loved this Avs team. Like the year they won, I was pumping their tires so hard. The year before when they lost to Vegas, I was pushing them hard. I thought this last summer they were a good bet prior to the season. I don't see how that's the case now. They don't have the same guys. They have like obviously their top dogs are going to like keep the floor really high, but I don't see how they're a bet at this number at all. And then I think depending on what's out there, I think the Devils, I don't know if you need to bet it now. They're one of the teams that has to be good though. I don't really see where things fall off the rails for New Jersey. Like
I would bet
they're
it now, actually, if you were, because I think that they're going to end up getting a goalie. Like the fact that they've already been connected to Hellebuck.
And their team's good. Like they're not losing.
And that's what they're all they're really
young.
missing. is
Yeah.
a stable crease.
And
So
their D core could be stacked.
it could
Like
be, yeah,
Hughes could be really good. So I think the Devils are a team that's like, I don't really see where they're bad. And it's funny, two of the ones we thought were going to be not so much in cup markets, but I thought the Flames were going to be a good buy low team and
not anymore.
Columbus. And now
Yeah,
I'm out on both of them.
yeah,
I don't like what Columbus has going on. And the fact now is like, I think what they've done with like these signings, which I don't think are going to help them that much, is actually going to raise their stock a little bit in terms of people thinking they're going to compete. Whereas before I thought, I mean, we'll see. There's a chance. It all depends on where the markets are at. But I thought maybe Columbus could be a really good buy low team where everyone really rated what went wrong this year too highly. And then the one team that I'm not even remotely interested in, and you know this, and I think the injury news about the defensive core moves the needle even more. I am just dying to bet Florida to miss the playoffs out of the Atlantic, which is stacked. Buffalo looks really good. I think Ottawa is going to be really good. So if I can get a good number on Florida to miss the playoffs, I'm just waiting to find that because they're going to be starting pretty behind the eight ball. I know they're going to do something like apparently they're looking to trade Duclair to bring in a useful defense or defender, but that'd be one. Like they
yeah.
could have two useful defensemen in the lineup for opening night. So I think that Florida is probably going to be a little overvalued, and I'm hoping to get into some positions to fade them for sure.
So a couple predictions I want to make. One, I think Edmonton and New Jersey are going to go off on opening night basically as co-favorites to win the Stanley Cup. I think that we'll see New Jersey address its goaltending. I think Edmonton will just people will like you think like you do right now, which is we gotta there's not going to be a better number out there for the rest of the season, so we'll bet them now. The other thing is that like you said, I think Columbus already started to get a little bit of hype, but it also could have been just that they were the only team that really did anything of note to improve their team so far in the offseason. But you talked about the Atlantic. I think Boston, it's I'm not just saying they're going to take a step back, but because of course they are, they're not going to be better than the best team ever in a regular season, but they are a threat, I think, also to completely bottom out, depending on how healthy they're able to be next season. And like we're going to be low on Florida again, and then it's Toronto, Tampa, who have more questions than around them than they did going into the last couple seasons. At least Toronto does, and then there's that Senators, Sabres, those rising powers. I could see Detroit kind of flying under the radar a little bit here. I don't think that they're quite good enough to be like super interesting yet, but they get to Brinkat and find a way to settle their back end. Who knows? But I think the Atlantic is going to be wide open, and it's a division where I could see sort of like what the Devils almost did last year, a long shot winning the division, just getting hot. Whether it's on Buffalo and Ottawa, I think their numbers are going to be too short to do it. But who's to say Detroit just doesn't find a way in what should be a much softer division than it's been in years past, where you've had back-to-back President's trophies, then you had Tampa and Toronto duking it out. That's something to keep in mind too. So, and I do want to say that I think that the Coyotes are gonna be okay. Like they've already made the trade for Sean Durzi. This is not a team. This is not a team that's trying to trade for Andrew Ladd's contract and take on bad contracts. They have so much to spend at this draft. Like I wouldn't be surprised if Arizona walks away from the draft with like, it's not going to be Pierre-Luc Dubois, but like that caliber of a player, because they just like, here's 5 draft picks, take them, and we'll take this guy who signed for 2 years that doesn't have trade protection. And in that, like I said, the Central is going to be pretty soft, I think, and bottom heavy.
Yeah,
I don't know,
I
man.
see it.
I don't mind.
But
like this is gonna be
they'll be a
the
team to
death
watch.
It's gonna be the death of me. But I
They
think that the Coyotes
might
are
trade
the
Schmaltz
sneaky.
and Keller though.
I don't think they're gonna trade them though. If
Yeah.
I think it's much less likely that they trade those guys than it is that they bring in another good forward for them to play
Well, you
with.
got to
Like,
bring in someone, and they do.
yeah,
They have so many good young players that are
and they have
starting to
a
get
million
more
draft picks.
useful. Yeah, I mean
It's
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 ridiculous looking at their
I've
draft.
never seen anything like that before. They've already traded a second rounder for a good defenseman. Like I don't know.
But the thing is, we'll see how it plays out. Like it's going to be so appealing for them to do the same crap they've been doing. I think, and that's another good point. I think when we're talking Oilers, is like
They have to be good though. Like their fucking existence, excuse me, their existence depends on it. Like
you would think, and
I because
that's where I debate. Like, how could they ever pass on Michkov? Because it's like you guys have been tanking so hard for 3 years. You're telling me that you're scared to like take this guy because he's not going to be on the team. Like your whole team is like veterans who are LTIR. Like,
Yep.
anyways, yeah. So yeah, I think that's kind of my last note on the Oilers. Though it is going to be hard for teams to get a lot better via free agency this summer, and by hard, it's pretty much going to be impossible because you're going to overpay to get one guy who maybe doesn't even move the needle that much. Like there's like Orlov, Bertuzzi. I think that's pretty much it. Like it's bad. So it's going to be teams having to get aggressive through trades. And I know there is obviously ways to do that with some of these teams taking on cap dumps. Chicago's still super low. Like they're definitely taking on some more money somewhere, I'd say. And I like that they got Hall so that Bedard has an actual line mate to play with. That'll be a lot more fun than watching him fight through what he was going to have. But yeah, I think that does touch on the Oilers' point a little bit where like, yeah, they got to sort out the Bouchard situation, but I think that they will find a way to do that. And then that's kind of the main thing that would prevent them from being quite good again, is if somehow he left. So basically that's it. I'm pretty high on them again this year. I think they're gonna keep knocking on the door and give it a good effort.
I just want to say that I think the Islanders also at 50-1. I'll be on that.
Standard.
Yep.
Standard.
Just set it and forget it.
I think I'll probably be pushing that the Caps could go over their point total, but I don't think they can win the Cup because just the stars aren't there anymore compared to the rest of the East. It's hard to, have their elderly guys carrying the kind of weight they need to.
All right. Well, that'll do it.
Got to wrap with an Islanders plug.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah,
and then we're out of here.
I think that they're it's going to be the same exact kind of conversation about them, where there's going to be a lot of people like, oh, you could get the Islanders plus money to miss the playoffs, when they don't realize like they're deep. They might not be great.
Well, and they have a goalie who's almost locked to be.
And they've got
like he's the Vezina favorite.
Yeah,
probably deservedly. So I did look too. I think Shesterkin might be playable in the Vezina. I think there's some places out there where his number's livable. Just because there's not enough. Like if you're getting 7-1 on him, he's gonna be good and in the mix. Like he's this year, like his playoff proved as much as I think it possibly could. He was insane. The Devils probably should have smoked them. So anyways, I think that maybe under my boy Lavi, who knows how it'll go, but I think Shesterkin will be really good. So anyways.
All right. Well, that'll do it. Good luck betting the NHL draft. Hopefully there is some chaos and Jarmo someone's lying or whatever. And some of these long shots come through. And then we'll be back at some point in the middle of the summer to update when the dust settles on rosters. But in case we're not, we will see you guys again right before next season with all our preview content. Thank you for listening, subscribing, rating, reviewing. If you haven't done that, please do it to keep our profile up as we head into next season. For Nick Martin, I'm Michael Leboff. Thank you for listening to Line Change.